RSC campus. And his thinking about actors working in an ensemble is bound up with a conception he has of learning and research being part of the process of making and producing plays. And it was, I think, with that vision in mind that Michael very much welcomed an overture from the University of Warwick just over 3 years ago now, to develop further collaborations between the university and the RSC. There had been a long history of sort of ad hoc relationships, typically involving actors or directors coming to talk to students. There had been a student so-called boot camp for a production in the Swan. So a long history of relationships, really going back to the early days of the university, which was founded around about the same time as the RSC. And my colleague Carol Rutter had developed some very good relationships. But there was a feeling that the time might be right for something more ambitious, of a more serious collaboration, in which we could actually explore the relationships, but also the differences between the culture of the university and that of the theatre country. And the RSC were very enthusiastic about this, but they said, it's great, we've got lots of lovely ideas, but we can't do any of this unless we have dedicated new funding for them. It then happened that the Higher Education Funding Council for England had their bidding process for so-called Centres of Excellence in Teaching and Learning. And we saw this as an opportunity to put a bid together, because one of the striking things about that hefty initiative was it said that whilst bids have to come from a university, they may include as collaborators non-university organisations where learning takes place. And that, for us, that was the kind of gleam of light, the opportunity to put a bid together. So we went through a kind of internal university competition to get to be chosen as one of Warwick's bids, and then the national competition. And we are today supporting this event because we were successful in that bid. I'm very grateful to the way that Ben Knights and the English Subject Centre have really sort of taken an interest in what we're doing, and I hope that this will be the first of many occasions on which the Subject Centre and the Capital Centre can work together. What was interesting was that in the act of devising the funding bid, there was a sort of rhetoric within the hefty bidding document about the need for new pedagogy. So we had to find a way of putting together our ambitions for the theatre company and the university to work together with some thinking about pedagogy. And that actually proved very opportune, because it enabled us to put at the centre of our story a proposition, which is that the things that go on in a good rehearsal room are sometimes similar to the things that go on in a good classroom. That the process of creating a play, a sort of collaborative learning process that involves a sense of trust, of teamwork, of pushing at boundaries, of learning through the process of discovery, could actually be a very valuable way of thinking about our pedagogy. And in particular, a way of thinking about pedagogy differently from a sort of model of kind of information in, product out. So there's a sense that asking some questions about the meeting points of rehearsal room practice and classroom practice. That's at the centre of our activities. But then, sort of coming out from that, as it were, like sort of rays coming out from the sun, spokes of the wheel. There are an array of other activities. Just to give you a sort of sense of what we're about, I'll just tell you a bit about that before focusing back on that central thing, introducing Mary. One of the things that the conversations originated in was the fact that Warwick has a very strong writing programme in terms of visiting writers and creative writing students. And the RSC wanted to renew its commitment to new writing. If you look at the sort of charter of the RSC when it was founded, it was to do with not only making Shakespeare alive, making Shakespeare contemporary, but also fostering new writing. And of course, in the 60s, a lot of very strong British new writing emerged from the RSC. that sort of rather evaporated, or at least diminished through the 80s and 90s. And the current regime of the RSC is keen to recommit to liberating. This seemed to us a good opportunity. So one of our things we've been able to fund is the posts of Warwick RSC International Playwright in Residence. We've just made our first appointment on that. Dramatist Adriana Shaplin, who some of you may know about. He works with a company in New York called the Riot Group. He's with won, I think, 3 Fringe firsts. One critic said this man is the next David Mamet. He's certainly a very interesting dramatist, very politically engaged dramatist. So he's actually just starting an 18 months to 2 years, as you can see, where he will be working in the rehearsal room with the history company, Michael Boyd's Ensemble Company, and producing a play for them, writing a play for them, and then also teaching on a range of graduate and undergraduate fields at Warwick. The other sort of appointments we're making, we've got some short-term fellowships in creativity, which are partly sort of internal secondments for Warwick staff to develop innovative teaching, but they're also advertised nationally for people to apply from outside. And among our first appointees for that, the first one is actually starting in 2 weeks' time, as term begins, is Paul Allen, the Night Waves presenter, critic, biographer, dramatist, journal, who is going to be exploring various projects, including, I think, a very interesting project he wants to look at the history of Falstaff in relation partly to thinking about fat, which is kind of a hot topic these days, I guess. So he'll teach an MA module. He'll be using some of the resources of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust Library, working closely with the Trust as well as the Institute. And of course, he'll be working on that at the time that every 4 plays up in development. In terms of other activities that we've actually sort of achieved in our first year, the big highlight was we actually did a student show as part of the Fringe of the RSC Complete Works Festival. We did Devide as Montagues and Capulets, which, to my shame, I didn't even know that Devide had written a Romeo and Juliet story based on the same mechanics as Shakespeare, with a typical comic twist in the ending. And we thought, with Romeo and Juliet on the main stage, it would be fascinating to stage Lope's kind of take on the same story. And we did this at the RSC's Outdoor Theatre in Dell. It was a fantastic success. It then transferred down to London, to the studio in London. And 1,000 people saw it. For the students, it was an incredible process because they had a professional director, that was one of the former RSC associate directors, and professional expertise from voice, movement, fight, coming from the RSC, and RSC wardrobe costumes as well. And we hope that what we're then doing next year is we're putting that play into our European drama course and using the students' experience of the play as a kind of teaching feedback for the next lot of students. But it has to be said that putting on shows is very, very expensive. It's something we'll only be able to do a couple of times because of the funding we've got. It's a fantastic opportunity for students who do it both kind of on stage and backstage. But I was sort of nodding when Neil in his report yesterday was saying building a performance element into our teaching assessment of Shakespeare doesn't only mean staging a show. That's the kind of, as it were, the big end of it. But it can be something as small but nevertheless immensely valuable as 5 or 10 minutes of work on your feet in a seminar. So we're interested in the kind of full spectrum. But the show was a great a sort of public forum, sort of showcase for us. The other area that we've been developing very strongly, Roger talked a little bit about in his presentation yesterday, is we're very closely involved with the RSC's establishment of a learning network, which is an attempt to reach teachers in secondary schools. So we've actually built into the learning network the teachers come to Stratford, they have workshops with the RSC Learning Department, but also training through the Department of Education at Warwick that gives them a postgraduate certificate in teaching Shakespeare at the end of that sort of intensive course. And then they have the option to go on to take an MA. Some would come on here to Shakespeare Institute to take an MA in Shakespeare. Others would stay with us at Warwick, where we're developing an MA in creativity. And for me, one of the really interesting things about getting into this in the past year is discovering what an enormous kind of buzz there is in the DFES and indeed elsewhere around the idea of creativity, teaching of creativity. We've also got this model that really is at the core of our activity, of a kind of reciprocal process of an academic contribution to the learning, the research, the creation work within the RSC, an RSC contribution to staff and students in the university. That's really the core of what we're doing. So this ranges from academics in the rehearsal room, and indeed we're looking at this in relation not only to the RSC but to other companies. So for instance, this autumn, Chief Bang Chow in the early stages of rehearsing new production, Cymbeline, they're going to come for an intensive week where Carol Rotter and some of our graduate students will be with them working in the rehearsal room and developed on the new show. Academics in the rehearsal room, and then theatre practitioners in the classroom, a range of workshops, masterclasses, and talkbacks. Now this is an area where I think there's a sort of necessity to be self-critical, because it's a process that we've found in the first year is not without problems, both logistical and to some extent ideological. And I think one of the things I'd be interested in doing is sort of working on writing up the experience of the collaboration between a university and an arts organisation is to sort of be quite open about some of the difficulties that are involved. I hope that may help to serve as a model for others as they undertake similar kinds of relationships. There are simple logistical problems. For instance, the timetable of the theatre year and the timetable of the academic year don't exactly fit. I was wondering, thinking about when Neil said in his report yesterday how he was slightly surprised that whereas in say, the Midlands and the North East, a lot of people responding to the questionnaire were talking about theatre visits as being very much at the centre of the programme, but in the South East, London, that seemed to be less the case. I wondered, is that simply because the essential academic teaching year is October to April, after which is exams, whereas the Globe stage year is principally May to September. And so that mismatch means that building theatre visits into the curriculum during the year is not so possible at the Globe as it is at the RSC. I don't know that, it's a possibility.
Also the case, the RSC Newcastle season is October, November.
Which is very, very well placed. Of course, what one, and again, this sort of takes you to the sense of the cultural differences, which have to be negotiated in such a relationship. Because a theatre company, their main focus is on getting the next show up. So they think short in terms of time. A university, inevitably you think long. You're working with students who are going to be with you for at least 3 years. And in our current bureaucratic climate, if you want to introduce a new module that builds some of this work in, the process of getting module approval and getting the handbook in time and so on means you have to start working on it about 18 months before it actually happens. So we've had to do quite a lot of fancy footwork in sort of integrating this activity into our curriculum. Because one of the things we've certainly learned in the first year is that our sort of rather idealistic notion that one can provide a lot of performance-related activity as an attractive add-on, a kind of icing on the cake experience for students. The result of that is that the students who come along to those events, we've had day events, workshops, talkbacks, and sorts of things, but if they've been optional add-on, the students who come along are the ones who are committed to performance anyway, who in a sense don't need it. The only way you can reach the students who actually you need to reach is by building it into the syllabus. that they're building it into the syllabus raises a whole set of problems about how you assess it, and it makes the process of sort of integrating with the repertoire of the theatre company more difficult. So we have to sort of think on our feet. I mean, as it happens, our main Shakespeare course is on Shakespeare and his contemporaries. We put some Marlowe and Johnson and Milligan in it. So Women Beware Women is a kind of core play in that course, and as it happened, Women Beware Women, for the first time actually, was in the RSC repertoire last spring, so we were really able to focus on that. But of course, next spring, Women Beware Women won't be in the repertoire, so we have to think about something else. So those sorts of problems of logistics and timetable. And there's also really practical things which Susan Brock, our incredibly capable administrator, will tell you about. Try explaining to a university finance department that when you want to pay your director for your show, you have to go through an agent. University finance departments do not understand agents. It's a different culture. Equally, the theatre world, I think including my budget lines get a bit, I didn't realise that. The theatre world has a very strong culture of per diem payments and reimbursement of travel expenses, whereas universities tend not to give per diem. It's silly little things like that. But the kinds of level of accountability that are required by FQ and university finance department, a theatre company's finance department are not geared up to provide. So there are, as it were, cultural and institutional difficulties to be overcome. But that said, although things aren't always easy, it's already proving very rewarding collaboration. I think one of the main things that we're sort of learning from it is, it's interesting, Susan was saying, talking to students who've been in the show and asking them what was the big transferable skill that they learned from the process of intensive rehearsal, to a woman they said tolerance, a sense of learning the kinds of respect that are required in that very special space of the rehearsal room is something that is very, very valuable. At the same time, there's a sort of reciprocal learning process that I think needs to go on in the theatre, where some directors feel that the rehearsal room is a closed space, and the notion that there might be someone who kind of knows something about the text sitting in there. Some directors would find that very helpful, other directors would be very hostile to it on the grounds that they don't want that place to get contaminated. So there are sensibilities to be negotiated. The other big logistical problem is, in a sense, I perhaps touched on when I raised the point yesterday about how two of those kind of models of new teaching that we were talking about in yesterday's session. On the one hand, the model of e-learning, web-based materials. On the other hand, the model of the workshop, the experience on your feet, working together. But in some ways, these are absolute opposite poles. And maybe one is to do with deep attention, and the other to do with hyper-attention. One is very much requires a model of presence. The other one is a form of teaching that is a way of dealing with absence. The E model is, of course, how you can deliver to large numbers of people. You divide it by, devising resources, making them available on the web. You can reach millions of click of a button. The problem, of course, for active learning, kinesthetic learning, as the RSC department call it, is that you've got to be in the room doing it, and in a reasonably small group. So I'm sure many people have this experience, our big core Shakespeare course has 220 students. You cannot do a useful workshop for 220 students. You could possibly do a master class where they watch, but that's not the same as actually doing it. So can you do it in the seminar group of 15? Well, yes, you can, but how do you deliver workshops to all your seminar groups? The RSC Learning Department and other theatre learning departments are incredibly overstretched, and obviously, for very good reasons, want to commit the majority of their time to working secondary and primary schools. So you can't ask the RSC Learning Department to come deliver workshops to 20 different seminar groups. So the model that we are beginning beginning to develop, and I think it's going to work for us, is a kind of training the trainer model. Rather as RSC Learning are focusing so much on this idea of learning network for teachers, continuing professional development for teachers, giving teachers the capacity to go back into their schools and teach Shakespeare in more creative ways. So we feel this is something that we can do for the university teachers, both permanent staff and graduate tutors. So we're beginning a program where workshops in the active teaching of Shakespeare are provided for staff members and for graduate tutors. And certainly for our graduate tutors, we feel this will be a big kind of teaching bonus on their CVs to have the capacity to teach in this way. So we had a very interesting session, actually, with Mary Johnson here from the RCF department at the end of last term, where we invited the whole of the English departments, not just those involved in Shakespeare and early modern literature, to come to a session that was rather similar to what you were about to experience. To me, what was really exciting was in the discussion after that, so many colleagues saying, I don't teach Shakespeare at all, I don't teach theatre texts at all, but that exercise is something that would really work for me in my teaching of modernist poetry, 19th century American fiction. And that sense that this kind of learning technique, obviously, we need it for Shakespeare, and Shakespeare's a great place to test it out, but actually it is a learning technique that is transferable across the syllabus and indeed into other disciplines. Part of our agenda in Capital as the years go on is to start working with other departments, as well as with other English departments around the country, also with other disciplines at Warwick. So, for instance, we're already sharing some very interesting work with the School of Law, where a couple of guys who are very interested in law as a humanities subject, law as a performative subject. So, for instance, one of the law courses next year, which we're looking into, part of the assessment, the lawyers are going to have to write short plays, which doesn't make the idea of studying case law, I think, kind of more interesting than just looking at the dry old textbook. So I think there's lots of possibilities there. Anyway, the session was terrifically interesting. Although there was also that sense that you often get with academics of a degree of scepticism about anything that's different or new. And I think Mary won't mind me saying that she said after she found it one of her more challenging as well as more rewarding things. I'm going to hand over to Mary. Thank you very much. Unless anybody wants to ask me anything about Capital or Technical before we get into the beautiful.
One quick question.
Yeah.
How do you reach teachers before and training in the university?
Well, yes. We're working very closely with the Institute of Education at Warwick, the Education Department, and the teacher training element is being done through them in conjunction with RSC Learning. At the moment, the focus is, just for reasons of resource and sort of making sure we get the model right in the pilot, the focus is on the particular schools within this nationwide RSC Learning. But the ambition is to open out the postgraduate certificate to teachers more generally. We have the resources in place there. Yeah.
I just wanted to address your question about the theatre season.
Oh, theatre season, yeah.
You're right, it is a problem. And the way that we're able to get around it is our undergraduates come from the United States. So September 1st, they start their course, and we're still in season until the second week of October.
Yeah.
So the first 3 weeks, they do a lot of intensive playground.
Yeah.
In the spring semester, the graduate students can contribute to research when the rehearsals begin in March. So we have them engaging in that way. It's unfortunate that